What was the weirdest place you bumped into a friend? Not a friend per se. I went to a drama dance camp when I was 13ish. It was a lot of fun, and one of the camp leaders was a regional actor. This camp was about 2 hours from my hometown. Fast forward over 10 years later, I'm in a completely different city 90 minutes in another direction, taking an elevator in my work building. On steps is a clown, carrying balloons. I'd recognize him anywhere. I got to tell him how much that camp meant to me, and it seemed to make his day. Until him. So what do you do now? Me, I'm an accountant. He seemed disappointed. LOL. I have two that come to mind. When I was a kid in North Jersey, I went to a race at Pocono Raceway, and in a racetrack spanning 2.5 miles, and having over 75,000 people there some 60 miles from home. I just happened to walk down a hallway at the same time as one of my classmates happened to be there. And years ago my dad was a over-the-road truck driver. I was on a long road trip coming through Tennessee, maybe 500 miles from home. I stopped at a truck stop to take a leak and get some food, and there's my dad in there getting things for the run he was on. So I made him buy my dinner. When my husband and I first moved in together, we had a buddy living with us as a roommate, Brett. He was a cool dude. He told us one day he was gonna be out and stuff. I don't think he told us where he was going to be. It was close to my hub's birthday, and his family lived in the Chicago area, so we decided to take a day trip up. On the way home, we stopped at the Hofbrau place in Rosemont for dinner. About halfway through eating, I realized Brett was sitting at a different table. Totally accidental, but it was so odd that we both ended up there when it was about 2.5 hours from home. One time I was in an accident on my way to work in the morning. My car was thrashed and sitting in the middle of the intersection. No injuries on both sides, thankfully. In that first minute or so while I'm sitting in the front seat, dazed and trying to figure WTF is going on, one of my best friends is knocking on my window. First person at the scene after the accident. Thought I was dreaming or knocked out for a minute. Turns out he was on his way to work as well and saw the crash and thought that looked like delivers his car and came up to the vehicle, and sure enough it was me. Sitting in crazy bumper-to-bumper traffic. It's what my city is known for. I pull up to a funky Scully in the lane right next to me, and I start thinking, man, that's crazy, that Scully has the same paint job as the one owned by my good buddy from high school, but that's impossible. He's in LA right now. Dude wrote a best-selling novel, then cashed out, moved across the country, and is living the dream, just smoking and surfing and traveling in his van. We were able to roll down our windows and have a whole catching up chat for 10 minutes while stopped in traffic. Not me, but my dad. In the early 2000s my dad applied to an adult video store in the city he was living in at the time as a joke. He ended up getting the job and actually took it because he hated his job at the time. On one of his first shifts some of his friends went to go see him and they were all hanging out there. In walks another one of his friends, except he was there to return some videos and not hang out. He hands my dad the videos and it was just a stack of granny videos. My dad and the rest of his friends stopped hanging out with him after this experience. Not my story but my cousin's. For a small background, we are from around Buffalo, New York. He was backpacking the Pacific Crest Trail in California, very deep in the backcountry. He stumbled across another hiker who started yelling to get his attention. This hiker was out of food and water and asked my cousin for help. As the hiker got closer, my cousin thought he looked familiar. Turns out it was someone he went to high school with back in Buffalo. His dad was one of our English teachers. He ended up giving him some food and water and they went in their separate ways. I'm American, but I used to live in Japan and went back for a visit recently. I got lost looking for the place I was staying in Osaka, where I had never been before. Someone I knew from when I lived in Fukuoka 600 kilometers away happened to bike past and recognized me even though I am 30 pounds heavier and was wearing a mask. He helped find the place and we met up for curry later that week. Second place would be running into one of my 10-year-old students at a national park 4 hours away during spring break. I was mostly unfazed but she seemed pretty shook. Several years ago, I was leaving a friend's house in basically the middle of nowhere late at night, and I passed this lone sex shop and decided to stop in. Walked around for a few minutes and then left. As I was walking out, this guy that I used to hang out with was walking in. We locked eyes and exchanged a side "oh, hey man" before passing right by each other. Could tell that we both would have liked to actually talk and catch up a bit, but the setting was just too odd for either of us. Still haven't talked to him since. Hope he's doing alright. I live in Texas with the exception of an 8-month period in California. On a road trip to St. Louis, I ran into a buddy from class at a McDonald's in Joplin, Missouri. I ran into a friend at Disney World while we were boarding the Skyliner. I ran into several friends in Mexico. When I was in California, I lived next door to a girl who was from my same small town in West Texas. She was a year behind me in school. Those are just a few examples. My husband jokes that we cannot go anywhere without running into someone I know. My we live in California girlfriend bumped into one of my co-workers who she met a few times. They met in the women's bathroom of a restaurant in Milan. They both happened to be in town for their big furniture convention, Salone del Mobile Milano. X200B. For me, it was either seeing my past 5th grade teacher in an adult video store, when I was 19 years old. No, I didn't say hi, X200B. I once ran into my old roommate's new roommates outside a random suburban strip mall burger joint about 9 hours away from where we all lived, at a kink event. It wasn't that the kink event was weird, but the girl and I went to the same gym. The gym was about 2 hours from the kink event. To see the same person at the same time 2 hours away from where we both lived was a shock. The event was big enough it attracted folks from out of state, so if she was kinky, she definitely would have wanted to go. I just had no idea she was kinky. Meanwhile, she said for months she passed by me on a treadmill reading a kinky site. She knew but wanted to respect my privacy. I walked into my dorm room at the end of my freshman year, and could tell my roommate was under the covers with a guy. I thought it was the guy she'd been sleeping with recently, so I said hi Jess, hi Timmy, and the covers flew back and this naked dude goes, hey, my name, how have you been? It was Ross. The scrawny nerd I'd gone to high school with in a totally different city and hadn't seen in probably more than a year. I didn't even know he went to my university. But there he was. In my room. Boning my roommate. I was in Seattle, Washington for a visit. On one day we were a couple miles from the Space Needle doing a long walk on this trail next to the water. We pass a couple who I didn't notice. Then a few seconds later I hear, Frank, it's obviously not me they're shouting at because I'd never been to Seattle and literally live on the farthest point away from Seattle in South Florida. Tap on my shoulder. Turn around and it's a former roommate with his wife. I don't know the odds, but to me it's mind-boggling. My wife and had only been married a couple of years in 1989 and went on vacation the same week my dad went on honeymoon with his third wife. He lived in Tennessee and we lived in Florida. He was going to Virginia and we were staying in the mountains in West Virginia. None of us had cell phones in those days, but we joked before we all left that we should meet up since we'd be a lot closer than normal. On a whim my wife and I decided to go to Washington, D.C. for the day and we ran into them at the Capitol. Not sure I'd really say friend, but I used to work at a Walmart in Arizona. I would sometimes chat with an associate there. X200B. Couple years ago my wife and I were driving through either New Mexico or Colorado, stopped at an outdoors chain shop and he was working there. X200B. X200B. Another time I was in South Korea while in the army. I went to a baseball game with a friend of mine from South Korea and I saw my captain from my first unit. He also had gone to South Korea and is a baseball fan. Not really a friend but kinda. But my dad lives in a very small country town in Oregon. I lived in San Diego, CA. I came upon a potential roommate over there and was from the same town. Then I moved to the town this year and my brother introduced me to a new roommate who was from San Diego. Not only that but our moms worked together in 2015, smiley face. Now her mom moved to the town and I got her a job at my job. And my roommate works basically at my mom's job but at a different site. Small world. She walked past me and I was on my way to the break room. She tripped and I caught her so she didn't hit the ground. When I held her my left hand was cupping her breast. I was questioned if I did that on purpose. I replied, if I did it on purpose I wouldn't have used my left hand since I'm right hand dominant and I certainly wouldn't have kept my thick leather glove on. Perhaps I should have let her crack her head on the concrete floor so she can sue this place. Are we done here? I enlisted in the US Army in 2005. Ended up getting stationed in Germany, then took an assignment to get moved to Italy. Got in a little trouble in Italy that would end up getting me some prison time. A few months before I went to jail, they had already sent a new soldier that was going to be replacing me. The soldier they sent was from a small town about 45 minutes from me, and I had partied with a guy at a friend's house multiple times. 5,000 miles away, what are the chances? My roommate went to hang out with his girlfriend so my other roommate and I decided to go do something. We drive to a random park in the big city nearby that neither of us had ever been to, and are walking around. We're both saying man it would be fun if John would hang out with us more, and as we're talking about him, his head pops up over a hill. He and his girlfriend had gone to the same park, that they had also never been to. Not that crazy, but it was definitely weird. I'm from ND. I was in the Seattle airport on a layover and I'm wearing a UND Fighting Sioux sweatshirt. This was like 1998 and this old guy sits next to me and starts talking to me, calling me North Dakota like it's my name, and rambling on about what he's up to like we're old friends. I'm 16. This seems very creepy. Except it's my US Senator Byron Dorgan. We chat for an hour. We are brothers now. I'm over 40 and he still recognizes me when we cross paths every 5 years or so. A couple of years ago I was at a haunted hayride house place that was about an hour and a half from my house. My friend and I get on the hayride and sit down, and as I'm looking around I notice another very close friend of mine sitting across from me on the hayride. We had no idea either one of us were going to be at this haunted hayride place that night, and it was just so funny that we were put on the same hayride at a very crowded place relatively far from our houses. Had a friend I ran into in Times Square outside a Starbucks while my friends were getting coffee. I was in town for a wedding, he was in town for a bar mitzvah. We were both from CA. I get back into town and a week later and go to Disneyland. He's at the entrance with friends as my friends and I walked in. 2 weeks later we both ended up at the same bar in LA. If we hadn't been totally platonic I would have thought the fates were bringing us together. It was wild.